let's try that again. Hopefully I have everything on now. I don't know if I have this camera on. I think that one's on now. Sorry, I didn't have YouTube ready to go, and I want that to stream as well. So if you have any chance to go over there and check that out, and just see if YouTube is live for me, that would be great. You don't have to watch there, but I just want to see if I'm tapping into new viewers there. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, I'm going to start over with this is Gigaohm Biological, a high-resistance, low-noise information brief brought to you by a biologist out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's the 20th of February, 2025. You're probably watching me live if you're watching on the 20th of February. Biology is the way, life is a pattern, integrity, and if you want to be notified of the stream starting next week, please follow the directions there by sending an email to gigaohmhq@proton.me. with notify me in the subject. You can also go to gigaohmbiological.com and find a button that'll do the same thing. If you're here for the first time, you're hearing the voice of JJCouey, and you can check my work as an academic by going to the National Library of Medicine's website, PubMed, and enter in the last name Couey and the first name JJ, or first letters, I guess. And that should be all you need to do. I'll see you in a few seconds. It's probably about a 5-minute intro today. Thank you very much for checking YouTube, guys, and I'll see you in a minute.
Shouldn't just be a few people that are leaders. Everybody has to figure out their own leader inside themselves. If they're too shy to go approach somebody in person, then stick a card or a flyer on someone's car next to you every time you park your car. Stick a card inside of a gas station credit card slot every time you get gas. If everybody that is aware of the truth and awake to the truth started to do these things, we can touch people, the hearts and minds of people, one person at a time in day-to-day living. We don't need these echo chambers online where we're all repeating to the same followers most of the time. We get a few new people, but I think we really need more people to take what they're learning and get out there and touch the people that they're in a community with.
By about 1660, John Locke wrote that day laborers and tradesmen, spinsters and dairymaids must be told what to believe. The greatest part cannot know, and therefore they must believe.
But the GN1 is very, very alarming because the mutations are no longer restricted to spike protein, which indicates enhanced activity of CTLs to diminish viral infectiousness. And that CTL activity is responsible for the decline of T cells that in fact boost the non-neutralizing antibodies that prevent virulence. So that is what I've been predicting all the time, that ultimately this evolution would inevitably lead to the emergence of a highly virulent variant that would cause waves of hospitalization and severe disease in highly vaccinated countries. Of course, always the same, only in highly vaccinated countries, right?
So well, that's a relief.
It's literally turning into worst case
the latest
scenario.
data tells us that we're dealing with essentially a worst case
turning
scenario.
into worst
I'm
case
afraid
scenario.
that the latest data tells us that we're dealing with essentially
literally
a
turning
worst case
into
scenario.
worst case scenario.
I'm afraid that the latest data tells us that we're dealing with
thing, but you can tell if someone's lying. You know, you can sort of feel it in people. And I have lied. I'm sure I'll lie again. I don't want to lie. You know, I don't think I'm a liar. I try not to be a liar. I don't want to be a liar. I think it's like really important not to be a liar.
Specialization should make you suspicious. It should, because if it's gotten harder to evaluate what's going on, then it's presumably gotten easier for people to lie and to exaggerate. And then one should be, a little bit suspicious. And that's sort of my starting bias.
The question about pandemic. And Stephen, your immunology professor said very good because the question was very good. And
Exactly.
Of course, as I've been trying to say for 4 years now, there is no pandemic. There was no pandemic and there will be no pandemic. And it's like Jay said, the RNA can't pandemic. It can't. And there's no reason to discuss this anymore because it's clear. And if it's clear, we shouldn't waste time talking about it.
Your latest video with Paul was amazing, JJ.
Wow,
Really,
that's a very nice compliment. Thank you very much. Can you hear me better now or not?
Yes, much better.
Okay, good.
It was really like it nailed down two things for me, but I finally really understand the infectious clone idea. And I think it's very, very likely what happened. It aligns so well with the fact that I don't think anybody has been wrong so far. It's just nobody had a complete picture. And this kind of suits all of these things. There was a misinterpretation of the real question that was being asked. And what people really wanted to know is this SARS-2 thing a virus? That's the real question, not whether or not viruses exist in general. I mean, I think that just got mixed up too
They get
much.
mixed up in there indeed. And I think that people they get swept away in that. And it's a very much more, I think the people that are actually misrepresenting the no virus angle, and I do believe there are people that are doing it, are purposefully not curious about what happened. They're just sure that what they say didn't happen. And that part of it really bothers me. It drives me bananas. And it's the reason why I don't think it makes complete sense.
That's a perfect segue, by the way, to go to JJ's ideas about the infectious clones. I mean, it's a fascinating idea, and it makes so much sense. It gives credence to they did it on purpose as a biological weapon idea.
You want to go, JJ?
Yes, thank you. I'll go. So I've been active, like a lot of these humans, in trying to get the word out about basic biology. And I've been kind of focused on learning the immunology again, after having learned it as an undergraduate, as a grad student, and trying to figure out where the line of fidelity in virology is really drawn. And after about a year and a half of this struggle, I had my path cross the path of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And so since then, I've been a scientific advisor for him behind the scenes. And a lot of my recent work has been spurred by questions, and specifically questions about what is an infectious clone? What do they mean when they say this? Was a question that was posed to me by Bobby. And over the course of trying to figure out what the implications of this methodology were, I've come to realize that I think it's possible that there are more smoke and mirrors than anybody wants to really admit.
I'm not sure exactly who he is. His name is JJCouey, and I believe he's a consultant for CHD. And I believe he has a PhD in some sort of scientific discipline, from what I understand.
Introduce Jonathan, who's going to talk about his latest kind of distillation of what the pandemic means to society, to biology, to science, and to democracy, and to the whole kind of idea of empiricism and integrity. And then each of us, this incredible preeminent panel that we have, each one of you is going to get a chance to comment.
I don't care how you get there. I don't care what you do to get there. The goal is to win.
What time is it? Game time! Woo!
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the show. This is Gigaohm Biological. What a long, strange trip it's been, from the truckers all the way to NIH Director and Health and Human Services Secretary. Very exciting days, but we are under an enchantment that can only be dispelled by each of us learning biology. It sounds weird, but actually that's the truth as far as I can see it. We all have work to do, we all have reading to do, we all have exercise to do. We're going to need to catch up because we have been bamboozled for quite some time. We inherited these charlatans from our parents, and it's our consciousness all occupied by their social media apps that has really made our consciousness their prime real estate, where it's not a matter of what is true that counts, but a matter of what is perceived to be true. And since all those images that are scrolling past our thumb are their images, this den of vipers and thieves is getting away with murder. They've already been in control of our money for a few generations. Now they're in control of our minds because we're not reading books anymore, ladies and gentlemen. We're not learning our history anymore. That's really the issue here. And I think there are a few people in America and around the world who are trying to fix that problem. I think Mark Kulak out of Boston, Massachusetts is one. That's Housatonic Live. I think another one out of northern or somewhere in New York, I believe, in the woods, is The Liberty Perspective. That's Joe Marshall with a book called The Last Call for Liberty. There's also, of course, Grace's dad, Scott Schara, whose case is going to be very important for establishing a lot of precedents about doctors being culpable in the death of their patients. And finally, my international friend Uwe Alschner, who works hard on Substack, who I met through our collaboration in CHD. He writes a great Substack, plugs my work a lot, and I'm very grateful for that. He recently published a radio podcast, which was just phenomenal. It was nuts to hear myself on a German radio broadcast. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Alschner. This is a crazy time, ladies and gentlemen, because this illusion that we thought we saw before the pandemic is still going, but it's now being maintained by all these new organizations that have come up. You know, before the pandemic, there was just ICANN and CHD, and barely anybody knew who the heck they were. And then now we have this, and it's really an incredible place where we are, because I think that the manipulation of us as citizenry is now more exposed than ever, because they have overextended themselves on social media with these people, and they are relying on us not to check out. They are relying on us not to see the big picture of world population, the big picture of the limits of animal experimentation, the limits of what they can do without our data. And their plans need us to be attached to their networks so that they can collect our data all the time, not only to manipulate the habits and opinions of us, but also to harness our medical data. It's both. It is an all-encompassing plan to create a noosphere by which the average masses can be told what to believe. And I think that they are told what to believe by the curation of a very, very lively debate within a limited spectrum that reinforces the presuppositions of the system all the time. And I think what they've done is they stick to a spectacular script that they all have privy to, that they all know what the red lines are, and they have all talking points that they're told to stick to. Some of the people that have been in this narrative have been in the narrative as long as their minor daughters have been producing content for the dry run of this narrative that probably started in 2017 or 18, when people were starting to be put in place, like Brett Weinstein, like the mother of Soph's daughter, Soph, and like many of these other people that were put in place in the intellectual dark web in 2018 and 19. You just see that people are being pulled off of the same bench all the time. And you see that their rhetoric is always the same. I mean, Brett Weinstein saying that this is potentially the end of the West is not a patriotic statement. And so often Brett Weinstein is unable to identify as an American fighting for America within an American system, but instead is always talking about the World Health Organization and the UN and the globe. And that kind of nonsense is an admission just the same as the admissions that Kevin McKernan has been making for 5 years straight, that only followers of me can see, not the followers of him. Because again, Twitter and X, these are all phantoms. What you see is not what everybody else sees. And these people know it. They work together, and they are spectacularly committed to this lie and coordinating it between one another. I think that Kevin McKernan is probably one of the ringleaders of the narrative control team, and that's why he makes ridiculous statements and ridiculous tweets with the confidence of knowing that no one in mainstream media who he's ever going to be exposed to is going to follow up usefully, and probably can't even follow up usefully because of the nature of social media. The reality is that these people still need us to teach our children that gain of function is real. They still need our science teachers to adopt this idea, and so we still have a chance to stop them. The animals in the farm still have a chance to wake up if we can figure out what common sense meant before the pandemic and start using it again. If we can engage in non-compliance, that's really the trick, is teaching parents how to engage in non-compliance and be able to argue back against the nurse and the doctor, or to find a better doctor. And that is a network that we need to create, indeed. But I don't see a lot of people trying to do that. We need to probably speak to college kids and give them this message, that actually their parents are responsible for the trap that they're in. They would have never gone back to college if their parents would have given them the right advice, if their doctors would have given them the right advice. And we need Grace's dad's lawsuit to win, because again, we need doctors to be held accountable. They cannot be allowed to say that it was just what they were told to do. And that's the way we do that, is learning the biology. The way that we do that is really learning the biology and the history of it, the history of these ideas, the history of people who curated these ideas, who propagated them. Because once we give power to a charlatan, you almost never get it back. And this time, I want it to be different. For my kids and for yours, this time, I want it to be different. And I think it could be, because I do think that this narrative and the biology, the mythology is overextended on social media right now. It's just a question of whether we can get ahead of them, whether we can get ahead of learning this stuff, and I think there is hope. I think there's hope that we can teach high school biology online in a way that kids will go off to college knowing the illusion that all of these people bought into, that the deans of their colleges bought into. And they will start to pursue a line of truth, a line that is motivated by love, and start to spread the truth to others. If we could get college kids to understand that intramuscular injection is dumb, that transfection was always criminal, and that RNA cannot pandemic, that we could get college kids to understand that the U.S. vaccine schedule is a criminal enterprise, and maybe many of the chronic diseases that they have that their parents don't have are a result of it. Let's see. Click. Thank you very much for joining me, ladies and gentlemen. This is Gigaohm Biological, a high-resistance, low-noise information brief brought to you by a biologist. Just try to fade that out as awkwardly as possible here. Thank you very much for joining me. It's the 20th of February, 2020. We are here again for another news brief. Today I have a very specific message in mind. Yesterday I fuddled around a little bit. I got discombobulated by the communications with the chat, and I apologize for that. Sometimes I get a little riled up because I think that certainty makes me mad. I think when people imply certainty, I get upset. When people imply that I'm being certain or that I'm being misled, I get upset, because I guess I feel like after 5 years of being misled and being the one who's regularly online, on air, confessing to being misled, the last thing I need to do is to be told in the chat that I'm being misled. It's one of those things that comes with the territory. The more people you have whispering in your ear, the more likely you are to be misled. And I think that's a good rule that in general for me has worked out really well. And so again, I apologize for getting upset, but this is high pressure stuff. My old boss is now HHS secretary, and so things are a little goofy, but I'm trying to project a message of hope that is not for everyone, but for anyone, about the truth of the biology of pandemics and vaccination. And the fact of the matter is that none of these ideas and concepts are mine. These are all things that I found lying on the floor and discarded by the people who are leading the charge here. And I think an important message to bring today is that the United States of America, if we are led by charlatans, we will never escape the trap. And unfortunately, we are being led by charlatans, but the consequences of that may not be completely obvious to you if indeed you are still, for the most part, skillfully using social media to try and solve your way out. Because in that case, you're not aware of how close you are to the trap actually closing. Now, you still don't really know what I'm talking about, but I'll get there. All the marbles, that's what it's about. It's about the grandchildren of Earth. So they don't even, they're already kind of have our kids, because our kids already have social media accounts. Our kids that we sent off to college are already in their grasp. And so this is really about our grandchildren, and we need to wake up our children that it's about our grandchildren so that they're aware. Because if we don't start teaching our kids to think on longer time horizons than a few weeks, then the same stunt that has happened that has pushed the trucker protests so far into our past already that we can barely remember what year it happened in, to where we won't be able to sort out our own history logically and understand that we were lied to by these people. Now, what I am proposing, if you're here for the first time, is that weaponized piles of money, and there are a lot of them, and the older the pile of money is, the more likely it is to be giant and weaponized against us. Think Dutch East Indies Company, you know what I mean? Think Vatican, think that old. The overclass have placed and have always placed highly trained acolytes in positions of power to manipulate the habits and opinions of the citizenry in order to govern them. And they have, that allows them to make us believe in almost anything. And although this has been going on for generations, it is never before in the history of humankind that a combination of technology and connectivity has allowed the extensive bamboozlement of almost an entire world population into believing a whole set of myths about their history and about their biology and about religion and about spirituality that are all wrong. And now we're at the sort of exponential of where this change is going to happen as rapidly as our controllers want it to happen, because we have fully acquiesced as a population to using social media as a tool to communicate and thinking that this is a great kind of town square plus. And that's absolutely, 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 that's wrong. And in this case, in the last 5 years, they have used the last 5 years to bamboozle us into not realizing that PCR is not a useful diagnostic tool, to not ever come to the realization that your aunt or your mom or dad that was put on supplementary oxygen at the hospital probably progressed to pneumonia or to ARDS because of that oxygen. And so everybody needs to look at what happened to their relatives that died in hospitals during COVID, especially 2020, 21, 22, because that's what happened to Grace and many others. Not using antibiotics for pneumonia is a crime. And any doctor worth their salt should know that. And this happened in spades, as is illustrated in this graph, where we have control of pneumonia for decades and then lose control of it for about 2.5 years. And so it is a long, strange trip where Team Worst Case Scenario has accomplished something for our slavers that previous generations have not been able to accomplish. Also because there wasn't really it wasn't really the time. The computer technology, the storage technology, the AI, the machine learning algorithms didn't exist. But now they are starting to exist, and so now we can build the infrastructure that's necessary to collect and store and homogenize the genetic data of as many people as possible and start to use the computing power that we've developed to try to apply machine learning algorithms to the human genome. But that's not a task like equivalent to applying machine algorithms to Go, because Go is a set number of squares with a set number of stones that only have two possible states, and it was considered to be a crazy accomplishment. Now imagine that you have a human genome that could have millions of bases with 4 settings each. And now tell me how long it's going to take a machine algorithm and how much computing power and how you get all that data to be fed through. It's just a level of computing space and memory space that we can't really comprehend from the perspective of the kind of calculations that we do with Go or with chess in machine learning. And yet comically, we just hand wave about this as though 10 years from now, this will be a done deal. It's already going to be over. And I assure you, behind the scenes in these discussions about this stuff, they've been saying that for decades already. And so, yes, I think Brandy Vaughn is a very important piece to this puzzle, because I think that the one thing that strikes me about her is that she says things so well, calling out the yellow fever vaccine, calling out the inside out part of the immune system, calling out, it's all really good. And so what's striking for me is that these ideas were all pretty sharp already when Brandy was enunciating them, and yet all the people that have come after her have neglected these wonderfully crafted semantic blades, like ingestion versus injection, like learn the risk, like it's no safe vaccine. These are things that, like it or not, people were saying around Brandy, and Brandy was saying in 2015, 16, 17, and then all the people that stepped in front of us in the beginning of COVID said nothing of the sort, and we're saying nothing of the sort. And here we are, where the guy who declared a lab leak in January 25th, 2020, that brought us Lee Min Yan, the whistleblower, and Miles Gao, her handler, and streamed with Steve Hatfield in January of 2020, seems to have coordinated some kind of populist movement that got Donald Trump reelected and got Robert F. Kennedy Jr. near to, but not the vice presidency, and seems to have involved the intellectual dark web, like all these people that are on Twitter and X, all these people who were claiming that Elon Musk was brilliant for saving the world of free speech, all these people that were around in 2020 saying that the mystery of the novel virus was being solved on Twitter and censored on Twitter. These people seem to be pretty responsible for getting us here, and the track record will show that Sasha Latipova and Kevin McKernan and Kevin McCairn and Charles Rixey and Brett Weinstein, they're all tied together with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So if Robert F. Kennedy Jr. were to be discredited by anything that these people in his proximity do or did or have said, we could have a pretty big problem. So, for example, if somebody on the other side were to find out that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. interviewed, or CHD interviewed, Sasha Latipova 3 times in 2023, and her daughter threatened and lost her YouTube channel in 2019 for threatening to come to the YouTube CEO's house and kill her or something, and then was promoted 3 times in 2019 by Alex Jones, Boy, that'll look a little weird, won't it, for the Health and Human Services Secretary? It'll be also weird if the head of the NIH had interviewed Charles Rixey already a year and a half ago, won't it, when Charles Rixey is finally discredited? But he did, and it's on his Substack, so it's very weird how this guy could possibly get confirmed if all of these things are just freely available, and yet Robert F. Kennedy just got confirmed. And so something very malevolent is happening, and it is actually an intentional theater that I think all of these people, to some extent or another, are involved. And I don't think it's a crazy idea, given the incredible circumstances of Steve Bannon's timeline, with how many frontline PBS coverage he got in before the pandemic and at the start. It's remarkable where we are. It is absolutely remarkable where we are, because these people were in front of the Senate. They were also in front of in Romania and Bucharest, and they're all saying the same nonsense that I have been able to very specifically delineate why it is nonsense. And I really implore you, if you're here for the first time, this is what Edward Bernays warned us about in 1924, when he had no idea that we would all be holding a cell phone full of military programs and thinking we were talking to each other, thinking we were getting a read on what's happening in America by a few minutes of scrolling. And so these powers have been acknowledged for generations, and these powers are now more powerful than ever given social media. And we are fractured inside of this limited spectrum of debate that was created by these people in particular in my life. There are others that are periphery to this, one of them being James Lyons Weiler, that I'd like to talk about today, one of them being Brett Weinstein on that picture. But the simple answer to the question is that an anticipated rise in expected deaths was sculpted using murder and sophisticated lies to create the myth of an RNA pandemic. That's why we are here where we are, and that's the theater that these people enacted on mainstream media and on social media. And if you ever thought that you were a part of it, if you ever went to a meeting or a dinner and you sat there and they were listening to you and telling you how great you were essentially brought on stage, and you got confused and thought that whatever you said mattered, even though the rest of the people that are on stage were enacting a script. And so we're going on the 6th year now, ladies and gentlemen. If we don't wake up soon, we're in big trouble. In case you are not aware, Gigaohm Biological is funded by viewers like you, not like PBS NewsHour. So if you can and haven't yet, please go to Gigaohm Biological and find a way to support the stream. It is for all the marbles. It's about the grandchildren of Earth. I want to go back in time, as I usually do, because I do think it's very, very important to regularly document and to archive. And so I think this video, at least the first 30 minutes of it, is very important to archive. But first, I think I'm going to make...
Hey, this is Dr. Ben White, host of the Rational Wellness Podcast.
I want to think about already what you see here now. In March 2020, this guy seems to know that it's time to be a podcaster. He's reading it. He's got music. He's got an intro. I mean, he doesn't look like a guy who's into podcasting, but he is podcasting.
Thanks for joining me.
Here he goes.
Let's jump into the podcast. Hello, Rational Wellness Podcasters. Thank you so much for joining me again today. For those of you who enjoy listening to the Rational Wellness Podcast, please go to Apple Podcasts and give us a ratings and review. If you'd like to see a video version of this podcast, please go to my YouTube page, White's Chiro. And if you go to my website, drwhites.com, you can find detailed show notes and a complete transcript. Today, we will be discussing the coronavirus pandemic with Dr. James Lyons Weiler. COVID-19 is the disease caused by the infection with the coronavirus that has made its way from a bat to humans in China and now is spread around the globe, creating a global pandemic. Dr. James.
In case you're not aware, or notice he is reading a script. I assume that James gave it to him, but anyway, here we go.
James Lyons, is it Weiler or Wheeler?
Weiler.
Weiler, thank you. Sorry about that. Is the founder and CEO of the Institute for Pure and Applied Knowledge, a not-for-profit research institute, also known as...
He's definitely reading a script that James gave him. Imagine that. Imagine how sad that is. No one's ever given me a script to read about their intro, or COVID-19 has become a what? Listen to this script he's reading. This is gross. Wow. I'm impressed.
He's the author of 3. And if you go to my website, drwhites.com,
I'm starting this
you
again.
can find detailed show notes and a complete transcript. Today, we will be discussing the coronavirus pandemic with Dr. James Lyons Weiler. COVID-19 is the disease caused by the infection with the coronavirus that has made its way from a bat to humans in China and now is spread around the globe, creating a global pandemic. Dr. James Lyons, is it Weiler or Wheeler?
Weiler.
Weiler, thank you. Sorry about that. Is the founder and CEO of the Institute for Pure and Applied Knowledge, a not-for-profit research institute, also known as IPAC. He's the author of 3 books, one on Ebola, another on cures versus profits, and a third on the environmental and genetic causes of autism, which is based on over 2,000 peer-reviewed studies on autism. Thank you, Dr. Lyons Weiler, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. It's a pleasure to be part of your experience here on this planet.
Thank you. And that's definitely a good way to phrase it on a day like this when living in...
Okay, let's make some observations here. It's March 18th, 2020. He's wearing a suit on a podcast. He's already got an angle set up where I don't know where his camera is, but it's set up a little funny. And it looks like to me these are very large pieces of paper with large writing on them, which is kind of like cue cards, but then at home on A4. So just pointing that out there, whatever.
In Los Angeles and trying to run a chiropractic practice, and people are afraid to come out of their house, and the level of fear, panic, and anxiety seems to be rising by the minute. So
you mean you guys haven't figured out all you have to do is put a shower curtain between you and your patient and you're fine, like in the movies?
So I thought we'd start with the most important question, and that is, what part does drinking Corona beers play in this coronavirus pandemic?
I think it's an essential part. You get the most clear-headed, rational thoughts that come to you. It doesn't necessarily have to be Corona either.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So can you explain how this coronavirus, because this is, we've had other coronaviruses before. We had SARS and we had MERS. Yeah. Can you explain how this coronavirus is different than the other coronaviruses?
Absolutely. So I'm going to be on that topic. I'll be talking about published research and not yet published research. So in the published research, we know that there are genomic differences at the genome level and important parts of important proteins. There are large differences. The spike protein seems to be.
Now, there's no reason in his prior resume to believe that somehow he would have as much molecular insight into the novel virus as he is about to demonstrate. But as I have made clear many times, he's one of the first guys that I found. His blog was featured in Dan Sirotkin's Harvard to the Big Houses blog. Dan Sirotkin's dad works at Los Alamos Laboratory and is named Carl Sirotkin. That blog featured the blog of James Lyons Weiler and cited it as a virology blog with evidence of the furin cleavage site and therefore a laboratory leak. So make no mistake about it. The person that I found and did a bike ride about and then promoted my video on Zero Hedge, that's all wrapped up into this week and maybe the 2 weeks before it. because it's the last, oh no, sorry, this is a month later, because it's the last week of January, I think, that Harvard to the Big House publishes his blog. And then 2 weeks later in February, I do my bike ride about it. And there I'm also already, one of the images I show is from this guy's blog. He's living in Pittsburgh at this time. And by the time I figured it out that he's living in Pittsburgh at this time, I contacted him on Twitter, and I have those direct messages, and we never really connected. He kind of managed to avoid me until he moved to Michigan the following year.
Quite distinct. The spike protein on the coronavirus is the protein that sits on the surface of the virus that allows entry. The virus uses it to enter into the host cell. And this
is that when we see those diagrams and those things sticking up?
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. Okay. Exactly. So those actually bind to a protein on the surface. It's called an ACE2 molecule in this virus, and it then fuses to the cellular membrane, and then the envelope opens up and becomes part of the cellular membrane, and then the contents of the virus, which is RNA, is spilled into the cell. The RNA that is seen by the cell as any other RNA, and then it starts creating viral proteins. So then you get a new virion, or a population of viruses in the cell, and then the cell bursts, and then the virus is spread from cell to cell.
So that's already an incredibly ham-fisted explanation of whatever virology is supposed to be, because he skips the problem of having to copy the RNA and putting the RNA back into a viral protein, like the coat, like the whole package. So it's a lot more complicated than the RNA going in and then a cell making viral proteins, because the cell also has to make copies of the genomic RNA and then package successfully the genomic RNA into a viral particle made of and coated with the viral proteins and not any other proteins. And so it's a lot of hand waving that he's happy to do for virology, even though he's supposed to be a guy who's skeptical about the vaccine schedule and skeptical about childhood diseases or something like that. But in no way, shape, or form does this guy have any grasp on what he's actually talking about. He's following a script that he doesn't understand well enough. And so that's why he looks as bad as he looks right now, and it's going to get much worse. This is awful. But there's no other way to see this other than this is a criminal who was given a script and went along with it, and as a result is a traitor to our grandkids, a traitor to us, his fellow Americans, because he went along with something he should not have gone along with. He read a script he should not have read because of whoever gave it to him. He knew that this would be malevolent.
This particular virus has a spike protein that has a number of unique characteristics. There's a new Nature study that I just finished looking over this morning that shows that the spike protein has distinct, well, it's citing some previous literature. It has a furin cleavage site, which we've known about for about 2-3 weeks.
He's one of the first people to write about the furin cleavage site. So there you go. 2 to 3 weeks would put it right at the end of February, but I think it was earlier than that.
But it has a number of distinct elements, including one that appears to potentially help the virus target immune cells. And
so targeting immune cells was also something that Paul Cottrell was saying over and over again. He was saying the CD147 receptor over and over and over again, which I believe is a T cell receptor. And that's what led to this rumors of flying AIDS that started already, yes, in March 2020 with Paul Cottrell and Harvard to the Big House and this super clown who is seeding that narrative right now. And again, this is not his idea. He's not a molecular biologist. He doesn't know how to do any of this stuff. He just says he's reading papers and coming to conclusions. He's reading a script.
You know, my own research, and this is the unpublished part of it because it's still under peer review, my own research shows that there is a protein motif signature that is characteristic of this particular spike protein. There are 4 elements that we're paying attention to, and it seems to have, and I want scientists to understand this, it has a truncated N-terminal domain in the spike protein, in the first part of the protein. That's unusual compared to other SARS and other related beta coronaviruses. And then it's missing two other domains that appear to be present in all other coronaviruses that are related to this. And then it appears to have a GP40-like domain. I always say GP40-like domain because it is not a GP40 domain. So there are very specific molecular differences in the spike protein. It's going to have a different molecular function, therefore, because the sequence determines the structure, which determines the function. But that clinically, then, this is a very different virus because this virus has a 4 to 5 day.
So here he's now going to describe the known statistics of the virus in a very certain way. And again, this host stands no chance, and he's not meant to. This is all fake. This was a setup. You want a podcast? I got podcast guests. Here's one of the podcast guests. He probably had Meryl Nass on too, or one of these other people. It's almost without a doubt.
Asymptomatic period. So you can get infected, and then 4 or 5 days later, before you have your first symptoms. About 80% of people can be expected to have mild symptoms. But the people that do have serious symptoms, 14% need hospitalization and 66% need an ICU. So, we're at the onset of the outbreak here. We are at least 3 weeks behind where we could have been with accurate testing.
So we're at least 3 weeks behind where we could have been with accurate testing. So in March 18th of 2020, he also knows from his script that a crucial part of the narrative in 2020 is going to be to debate about whether the tests work and how specific they are and whether overcycling matters or not, and not talk at all about how many amplicons are being used or whether there's nested primers or whether they're sequencing what they amplify. Nothing of that. And so with all of his magic knowledge about all this molecular biology, he's not going to explain the very basics of the PCR test and the premise behind it. He's just going to tell you that accurate testing is real. We can totally do it. It's easy. We just aren't doing it yet.
Initially, we really missed the ball in accurate testing. But nevertheless, we're in the exponential part of the curve. And during that exponential part of the curve, it's a race between the ability to produce enough tests and the virus to spread. And
that's the exponential part of the curve right there. This traitor was part of an illusion of consensus about what this curve right here meant. This curve in America was almost exclusively created by the New York City numbers. And this curve is exactly what he's talking about right now. And this curve is what Kevin McCairn was predicting would be 1 billion people dead. Worst case scenario. Make no mistake about it, ladies and gentlemen. I am suggesting that these people were put in place with a script. It didn't have all the pieces because that would make them vulnerable. It had the pieces that they were given, and these people were too simple or too excited to evaluate what they were doing. Maybe the operation was too compartmentalized for them to have any clue what they were doing, other than to know that they were told that they were doing something patriotic or going to save the country or something. I don't know. But it ain't good. Because by now they should realize what an absolute fiasco was created by them and what absolute prison planet we are on the way to because of what they did.
So now we've enacted some pretty serious social distancing. If you've noticed, it's impacting everyone's lives now.
Yes.
And 2 months ago, I was saying that we should stop shaking hands. We should start using the Ebola fist bump and so on. We need to.
2 months ago, in January of 2020, he was saying that we should start using the Ebola fist bump.
Sanitize public places. We need to tell people that are not essential to work from home if they can. And had those policies been implemented then in a gentle way, we would have bought more time. But now we've already reached the exponential curve. And in the exponential curve, then, social is even 60% on complete quarantine with this virus will not lead to a shutdown. You can force quarantine 60% of the American population, and it'll still spread.
So why is that even a hypothetical that he's talking about? Because he wants to seed the idea that the question of whether or not we can be mandated lockdown or not is a valid question to discuss. And if lockdown can stop a virus or reduce a virus to zero in any given situation. Well, let's discuss that, right? Holy yuck.
So I got a bunch of questions, but one question I wanted to ask to follow up on the fact that you said there's this incubation period. During that incubation period, if you get tested, would you potentially test positive or not until you become symptomatic?
Yeah, there's high levels of viruses in the pre-symptomatic period or the asymptomatic period. Unfortunately, the test that the CDC put out is maybe 60% sensitive.
So he already knows the sensitivity of the CDC test or the WHO test or whatever. I mean, it's 60%. What does that even mean? What kind of bullshit is this? The certainty level here is what you need to see and realize. This is not a person who's trying to figure it out. This is a person who is working a script, running a job. That's why the script is visible there. That's why he's got a suit on. That's why he's got the backdrop already.
Which means that there's a lot of people that are going to be given false. Yeah, that a lot of people that are going to be given false confidence that they don't have the virus, and that's why we're at where we are. I analyzed the CDC's primer probe sets, and I found that a quarter of them actually amplify human proteins, or likely to amplify human proteins as well as a viral protein, which could, unfortunately, the way they set up the test, it was best 3 out of 4 amplification reactions as a diagnostic. So if a person didn't have, they needed 3 out of 3, because one of the primer probe sets was probably, that reaction was probably not going to lead to a true positive ever. And so they said that there was some contamination or something like that, but I sent this information to CDC, and then I sent it to the FDA, and they showed great interest. The FDA showed great interest in what potentially could be wrong with this kit. Now, because we're already in the exponential part of the curve, places like the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center have announced that they're making their own test. People are not waiting. We cannot wait for the CDC to distribute accurate testing. That's what people have decided. I think it's a clinically ethical thing to do, to want to know the value of testing at this point is not to shut it down. Don't make no uncertain terms don't be confused by this. If we have 100 or 200 cases or 1,000 cases, for every one of those, there might be 80. For every one case, there might be 80 to 100.
Now, make no mistake about it. This guy has been on stage at every CHD conference that I've attended as a staff scientist. Not me, him. And most of the time, he's on stage multiple times during the weekend, like once every day, if not twice. He's shared the stage with people like Susan Humphreys, who really shouldn't share the stage with anyone. Same with Brian Hooker, to be honest. This guy is directly connected to our Health and Human Services Secretary right now. This guy could be used to single-handedly discredit Bobby's whole stance on everything. We watched a video from 2019 where this guy is talking about how vaccine-preventable diseases are circulating in the background of vaccinated populations asymptomatically. The exact narrative that Paul Offit and the CDC need. He was saying that to anti-vax people at anti-vax meetings while he was promoting the idea that it is a genetic vulnerability to components of the vaccine, and we need to do genetic testing on everybody to make the vaccine schedule safe. This guy has too much knowledge in March of 2020 too much knowledge unless he's been read in.
More cases that are out there that we don't know about. And so there's no way that the medical community is going to find all those people at this point. We've lost contact tracing. It's the asymptomatic period. Contact tracing is not going to be useful. The only utility of testing this point forward that I see would be expeditious use of resources like ICUs. And so we need really accurate testing. We need ventilators. There's
well, I mean, how can we know where the curve is to decide upon strategies like how long are we going to do social distancing and quarantining or whatever you want to call it, unless we really know, what the numbers are, and do we even know to what extent the numbers are going up, or just the fact that we're testing all these people who maybe were already positive and
I'll take that question as a serious one. There are two countries that we could have followed the model of. One is South Korea. We cannot follow the South Korea model. It's too late. We already reached the exponential point. They did expert contact tracing with online information systems that were really exquisite.
Online contact tracing information systems is what this guy is now advocating for to control a pandemic. This is as bad as Mary Holland advocating for AI online medicine and other innovation.
They did testing. They had it in place in time. It's too late for us to have a serious impact in terms of slowing down the spread of this, because we have, for every case that you see right now, that person was also 4 to 5 people 5 days ago were also infected along with that one person. So we're looking at of the number of cases that we have, we know 20% of what we have.
Wow.
So because we don't have the contact tracing combined in parity with the clinical testing, and the test that people are being shipped is not accurate.
How did that happen? Why is there such this massive screw up on the testing? Why were we so late with the testing? Why didn't we take the World Health Organization test? And what's the screw up at the CDC?
So unfortunately, CDC is more like a business corporation than it is a regulatory agency. It's not. They have a not-for-profit that pharmaceutical companies donate over $27 million to every year in the name of doing good for humanity. However, the World Health Organization offered the CDC the Germans test, the test from Germany, and they declined, and that cost us incredibly valuable 2 weeks.
Now that's really funny, because in November of this same year, Claire Craig of the Heart Group and Kevin McKernan of the Human Genome Project and Mike Yeadon of the pharmaceutical industry and Thomas Binder, cardiologist from Switzerland, and a bunch of other people are going to get together and write a paper about why the Corman-Jorston PCR test is bullshit. He's saying that because we didn't adopt the Corman-Jorston PCR test, we lost weeks in America. What a funny little hamster wheel we were on in 2020, right?
And I was hammering on, no, we need to get the testing now. We need to get the testing now. The other country whose model that where do we know where we are in the curve? Well, we know we're exponential. We know we're only seeing maybe 20% of the cases that are actually resident in the country. We don't know where they are. We don't know who they are. They include medical staff right now. They include nurses. They include the
He's not trying to scare anybody, though.
The doctors and so on. They include taxi cab drivers. They could be anyone. And the point is not to scare people, but China did not wait for a vaccine. China used social distancing, they put the people in home, and if you broke quarantine, you were arrested. That's why you saw people arrested. People say, oh my God, that can't ever happen here. Believe me, every governor in every state will prosecute you if you're under mandatory quarantine and you violate that quarantine, found to violate that quarantine. You will be arrested, you will be tried, you could be fined or imprisoned. Absolutely. Okay.
But to this point, we've never had mandatory quarantine, right?
I think
he just told you the same thing that that what is that lawyer, that famous constitutional lawyer that's been on like MSNBC, actually went on John Cullen's program or with Jason Goodman earlier in this year as well, to say that the government could lock you down and the government could come and inject you. James Lyons Weiler is just telling you the same thing. The government can put you in jail for this stuff.
I think San Francisco is now, pretty close to that. Pretty close to where everybody's supposed to stay.
Well,
right?
they're told, my son's in San Francisco right now going to college. And so they're basically told they're supposed to stay at home except for important things like going to the grocery store.
Okay, right. So we'll get to that. Right. So quarantine doesn't mean that you have to have 3 months of food in your house, right? So it means it's a good idea to have a week or two, right? But here's the deal. China shut this down.
We're not gonna.
You can still find that video on YouTube. I think it was in 2021 that Goodman had Dershowitz on his podcast. Yep.
Water supply is not going to be jeopardized.
The roof of your house is not going to blow off. It's not a hurricane. You're going to have electricity. Okay. The wastewater treatments are still going to work. Okay. So the utilities will all be there. But
well, according to some of these people, I think the script was actually that RFK would be the vice president. One of the best pieces of evidence I have for that. Hold on. Let me just get the book so I can show it to you. I can't find it. Where the hell is it now? I gotta locate it again. I have a new, sorry about that. I have a new bookshelf, and so I've arranged my books, and that means they're not where I expect them to be. I have to practice a little bit so I know where they all are all the time. But if you look for the book by Jesse the Body Ventura. It is a biography about his time as the governor of Minnesota. It is called Don't Start the Revolution Without Me. In the 13th chapter of that book, which is a fictional chapter 13, he runs for president with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as his vice president. And 2 months after he gets elected, he gets shot. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. becomes president and saves America. That's actually how that book from 2009 ends. And Brett Weinstein and Steve Bannon are two people, at least I know, who are on camera several times saying that they wanted Trump to select Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as his vice president. There's even a video of Brett Weinstein making a pitch for this before J.D. Vance was selected from, the shore of the lake by his house. This is not just something thrown out there. But I do agree him getting Health and Human Services Secretary is almost the same thing. Maybe it is exactly where he was supposed to be, and the whole narrative of we wanted him to be vice president is just to make it more acceptable that he's only Health and Human Services Secretary. It could be. I don't know.
China.
So stop stocking up on water bottles.
Well, I mean, if it makes you feel better, right? There's that aspect of it. If you like to see 20 cans of sardines in your pantry, go for it. That, if it makes you feel better, you're not hurting anybody by doing that. So you're actually driving the economy a little bit, right? So, and that's actually a very serious point.
No, I know the supermarkets are booming right now.
So in China, they shut this down through a combination of therapeutics and social distancing. They didn't just use social distancing, and there's no vaccine in China. They shut it down. And let me show you a curve, okay? China was doing this, and we're now talking about extending the curve out, flattening the curve out so that the medical community has time to...
I mean, come on. I hope you're not arguing with me in the chat, because J.D. Vance, they made a movie out of his book, so you don't have to convince me that guy was selected. It just is a question of, who did they select in the end? So I'm not claiming any special knowledge, I for sure, and I'm definitely not arguing with anybody that I know more than you guys do. Just be clear. I just know for sure it's a wonderful theater.
Be able to prepare to handle it. China's curve went just like this.
I just looked at it on a map, and can we trust that? Those statistics?
Yes, we can. The doctors are taking their, yes, we can.
So we can trust the curves from China. That's half of the story, because the other half of the story is people saying that you can't trust the curves, that they're lying about it. Remember that Andrew Huff said that one of the reasons why he knew something was happening was because he saw the smoke from all the burning bodies.
The doctors are taking, the nurses are taking their masks off. People are showing up in the streets. You're going to see video over the next few days or next week of Wuhan itself returning to normalcy. And that's what we want, because we cannot afford an extended social distancing. It will destroy our economy to maintain social distancing. And there's no promise that the vaccine that's being tried right now in Seattle is going to show the safety profile.
The vaccine being tried in Seattle. Did you hear that one, Mark?
That it needs to. I'm very skeptical that the animal studies, well, they skipped the animal studies and they went right to human trials. The problem with that is that the animal studies in every other SARS-like, MERS-like vaccine that used the spike protein,
right?
The animals getting the vaccine when they were challenged with the virus after the vaccine had worse clinical outcomes, higher morbidity, higher mortality. They had immunopathology in the lungs. They had hepatitis. They had serious issues. And I think it's an autoimmune reaction that you get sensitized to it by the vaccine, and then you get challenged by the virus. So I did a deep dive into the epitopes that are in the virus in SARS-CoV-2, and the deep dive that I did showed that there were, out of the 37 proteins that I studied, like all of them except for 6 had immunogenic peptides. So there's 6 of them that won't be useful in a vaccine.
So he's a pretty talented person that can take the sequence of viral proteins and scan them for immunogenic sequences, which I'm not really sure I would know how to do.
Out of all of those that had immunogenic peptides, all of them except for 1 had a match to a human protein. And a third of those matches were to immune system proteins.
It's weird, right, that all these viral particles would have such an overlap with human signals. It's almost like they might just be exosomes.
So that's probably why these animals had a worse outcome, because their own immune system was being attacked by their own immune system after they were challenged by the second virus. It's a 2-hit hypothesis. People are calling it immune enhancement, which is it's a misnomer. It's a gross misnomer. We're changing the terminology to pathologic priming.
We are changing the terminology to pathogenic priming, and he's still the only person on the planet that uses that combination of words to describe what everybody else calls like antibody-dependent enhancement or some bullshit like that.
Where the first exposure to the virus sets you up for a worse outcomes, whether it's through clinical exposure, you get a double infection. You get this SARS virus this year, you get another SARS coronavirus next year, whatever the second exposure is. And I think that it probably explains why the mortality was so.
Now, the funny part about this is that this is the actual mechanistic explanation for why 2 shots are the deadly one, and what Sukrit Bhakti has been saying since as long as I've known him, which is the first time you get transfected, your body clears that protein and maybe makes antibodies or killer T cells that can recognize that spike protein. The next time you get transfected to that spike protein, the killer T cells will take care of every cell expressing that. The antibodies will activate and kill every cell expressing it. And so the potential for the reaction to occur in the endothelium is only as bad as it is in the second one, provided that the whole immune mechanism that they purport is happening is really happening, where a foreign protein is creating antibody and other immune memory that is responded to the second exposure. Some of these immune observations that have been made in the past are not wholly bunk. They're just kind of dumb simple, and so it's not sufficient for understanding. But to some extent, the reason why Sukrit Bhakti was much more right than wrong is because that observation exists. And so what James Lyons Weiler seems to be doing is seeding a narrative where 2 exposures to the virus is equivalent to 2 transfections that nobody knows is coming. Nobody knows that's what the plan is. Nobody is thinking about this from that perspective, but it is very curious that this guy has a script wherein he's telling you that the second time you get exposed to it, no matter how it is, could potentially be very bad. I mean, this is gosh awful.
Stop lying.
Oh, so high initially in the Hubei province and in Wuhan, because the people there have been exposed to coronaviruses for years, and yet the national vaccine program that was mandatory and a widespread vaccine program only got started on December 1st. So we've got people that are
the widespread vaccination program in China only got started in 2020 or 2019. That's a pretty bizarre thing.
Exposed to this virus while their bodies still has adjuvants from the vaccines in them. In many cases, multiple adjuvants. And so
so you're telling me that James Lyons Weiler is aware that the Chinese started mandatorily vaccinating people at the same time that this outbreak is starting. And so it's not even remotely on his radar that maybe the disease that he's seeing is from this new mass vaccination campaign that was just started. Instead, he's saying that these people have adjuvants in their body from these vaccines and therefore are reacting to the virus. Do you hear this? This is March 2020. One of the heroes of the CHD movement, one of the guys that regularly is on stage at their biggest events. He was at the bus in Pittsburgh and gave a talk about he was the guy who found the fear and cleavage site first. I am not joking around here, ladies and gentlemen. These traitors are visible, and their track record goes all the way back to being in high-resolution photographs with Brandy Vaughn.
Wait a minute. So starting in December, they were vaccinated with which vaccine?
They just started a national mandatory vaccine program. There was a new law that
for this novel coronavirus.
No, just for vaccination programs.
Oh, so it's really weird, right? That the Chinese never had a mandatory vaccine program until the year that the pandemic started. It's really interesting that a similar thing happened in Italy, isn't it? The year before, that they just started vaccinating old people. Isn't it interesting? The military started vaccinating old people in Italy the year before the pandemic, and nobody wants to talk about it.
Other pathogens.
So did they get immunized against SARS?
No. I don't think they have. No, they don't have a SARS.
Okay.
Not to my knowledge. That was my initial concern. So that China, a company called Sinovac, actually in the 2000s did a vaccine safety phase 1 trial on humans. They did a vaccine trial on humans. I think they had 45 participants. I've never seen a phase 2 or a phase 3, but my initial suspicion, because the mortality was so high, I couldn't believe that a simple coronavirus could possibly lead to such high mortality and morbidity. And people are saying we can't trust from China what's going on. No, it was real. And if it was that high, what possibly could have caused it? And I suspected that perhaps the Chinese had on December 1st started a secret phase 2 or 3 clinical trial in Hubei province with a SARS coronavirus, setting people up, unbeknownst to them, for this pathogenic priming, aka immune enhancement. I'm not sure if that's real or not.
That is absolutely it, Pete. If you are recruited by the Pentagon, if you are recruited by a national security van that shows up at your house with a document that, okay, if you accept this folder, now you're on the team, well, then this is how you act. Absolutely.
But I know they didn't do that in Italy. So Italy has high morbidity.
They didn't do it in Italy.
They
absolutely did do it in Italy, yet he says they know that they didn't. Wow, that is phenomenal.
Who's most likely to
get
really sick and die here? There's a linear relationship between your age and your risk of serious illness, critical illness, and death. If you're above the age...
Is that mainly because older people, A, are more likely to have cardiovascular or respiratory problems and because they're more likely to have immune issues?
I think that's probably, a big part of it, because if you have a cardiovascular issue, you have like a 10% chance of mortality. If you have diabetes, you have a 6% chance of mortality. What are we doing here in the United States?
Listen to these figures. A 10% chance of dying if you have heart issues from COVID. That is some shit. Now, we could go on. This video is very long. It doesn't end. It is the same amount of nonsense.
States with such a high rate of...
I could keep it going. But the point of this, and the title of this, is The Danger of Following Charlatans. And now, this one is kind of an obvious one. Again, it's March 18th, 2020. There's no way in hell he can be this certain about this many things, about the molecular and biological aspects of this novel pathogen, unless he was given a script. And it's very likely he was given a script because of his track record before the pandemic. Now, associating with this charlatan is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and CHD and ICANN and all the people that are in pictures with him. All the people that support IPAC. That's all the same garbage. It's all the same half measures. And it is no different than the other people that have stepped in front of Brandy's language.
We welcome Mr. Matt Kibbe in. Hello,
now,
Matt.
5 years,
Hey,
6
Glenn.
years later, we have the lab leak story being put on Glenn Beck and being promoted on Peter McCullough's Substack by Charles Rixey. And I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, that it's all one show. James Lyons Weiler is no different than Meryl Nass, is no different than Mary Holland, is no different than Pierre Corey, is no different than Robert Malone, is no different than Jessica Rose, is no different than Denny Rancor, is no different than Nick Hudson, is no different than any of these people who have been on stage around the world and on more than 1,000 podcasts in the last 4 years, parading around, pretending to be leaders in a movement when the truth can be summarized very simply as saying there is no safe vaccine. There wasn't before the pandemic. There certainly isn't now that they've rolled out transfection, and RNA cannot pandemic. Done. Now, the danger of following these charlatans is that we can be discredited because we've followed them. We were fooled into solving this mystery, and we have accepted all of the monsters of this mystery as a result of their flawless performance. And it is very important that we explain to our kids how this happened and how visible it is in their own track records. Because the other side of this narrative that still thinks that it's probably just a natural phenomenon and that RNA pandemics are a natural phenomenon, they can see through the people on our side. They can see through them very easily. They have seen through them already years ago. And so while we are being misled to believe that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Meryl Nass and Robert Malone and Pierre Corey and Jessica Rose and Brett Weinstein have come to save us, the other side already understands these people as charlatans. Think about how many of these organizations have directly promoted this fraud and ignored me despite knowing who I am, and ignored Brandy despite knowing who she is, and more importantly, the biological truths that we were able to codify, they ignore with a passion while promoting an absolute monkey like Brett Weinstein. That's what this is. That's what this performance is. You should see it as the worst and most macabre dinner theater ever, that ignores everything that Brandy was able to say, ignores everything that I was able to learn and say, and will continue to do so because that's how we are governed.
Hey everyone, as you all know, I enjoy debunking charlatans more than just about anything else, and today we have a 2-for-1. We will be looking at Brett and Eric Weinstein, the self-appointed leaders of the intellectual dark web. I've never debunked brothers before, so let's have some fun with it. Again, in case you've never heard the term before, the
important thing to remember is that this guy's got 4 million subscribers on YouTube, and this video, after 4 months, has been seen more than 1.5 million times. That's a lot more coverage than Peter McCullough's Substack is getting. That's a lot more coverage than Robert Malone's Substack is getting. And this guy is directly connected to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and so could directly discredit him. Watch, because it ain't pretty.
These guys are prominent members of the so-called intellectual dark web, the term actually having been coined by Eric himself.
The group of people I'm increasingly hanging out with is the intellectual dark web, which is emerging.
The dark web, of course, being the place where people hire hitmen and watch kiddie porn, so it's not really the most sparkling connotation. But the deeper down the rabbit hole you go with these two, the seedier and more repulsive they seem, so it is quite fitting. Now, if you've seen some of my recent debunks on Terrence Howard, you've heard me talk about Eric a bit already. Well, there's a lot more to discuss here today, including a special guest to help me debunk his theory of geometric unity. But let's start with younger brother Brett, and then pivot to big boy Eric after that. Brett has a doctorate in evolutionary biology and taught at Evergreen State College for 15 years. He was catapulted to prominence in 2017 due to an incident on campus. Here's the popular version of the story. A protest had been held every year called Day of Absence, where minority students and faculty stayed off campus to make a statement about racial issues. In 2017, it was requested that white students and faculty leave campus instead for that year's Day of Absence. Brett vocally protested this idea, saying that you can't force people off campus just for being white. As a result, liberal SJW students threatened Brett with baseball bats, the media erupted with a story about reverse racism, and Brett became a hero overnight by standing up for marginalized white people everywhere. Of course, the reality is totally different. The Day of Absence had always been a voluntary activity where all students could attend workshops and discussions of their choosing, and this year was no different. It was simply that the locations of these discussions had changed, with the off-campus site only able to accommodate 200 people, making it obvious that it was not expected for all white students to attend, nor had all of the minority students participated in the past. None of it had ever been school-sanctioned, nobody was coercing white people off campus or making them feel unwelcome, and nobody threatened Brett with baseball bats. Brett totally exaggerated these events in his own correspondence, distorted the context surrounding those who were protesting a full 6 weeks after the Day of Absence regarding separate campus events, and instead went on Fox News with Tucker Carlson to play the victim in a story that reeks of the exact same vibe as the War on Christmas.
This year, student activists demanded that all white people leave campus or else.
Listen to his lisp, please. Listen to the way that he pronounces his words.
Oh my gosh, this is like something out of another country.
Because of the Fox piece, enraged neo-Nazi group Atomwaffen descended onto the campus, repeatedly driving by and shooting guns into the air, sending in bomb threats, and as a result, the school's graduation had to be moved off-site due to safety concerns. Brett sued the school for $3.8 million, settled for $500,000 and his resignation, and promptly began his career as a podcaster and darling of the right.
I'm troubled by what this implies about the current state of the left.
Whoa, you think? Whoa, you think?
Whoa, you think?
Where else have we seen this story before? Ah, yes, Jordan Peterson, frustrated academic taking a stand against PC culture, cartoonishly fabricating the implications of Bill C-16 to manufacture some kind of authoritarianism to rage against, leveraging the blowback and riding the conservative news cycle to launch himself towards a lucrative commentating career, hiding behind a false flag of free speech absolutism. It's all here, beat for beat. Brett, like Jordan, played the reluctant martyr and victim of nasty liberal academia, knowing full well that he was distorting the facts, putting students and faculty in real physical danger, many of whom were targeted with harassment and death threats from white nationalists, and he did it all anyway. He allowed Tucker to state that white people were being forced off campus, which was a lie.
The core demand is that all people of your skin color leave the campus.
He pretended protests were all about a leaked email of his, rather than about the treatment of 2 black students by campus police and other social issues. which was a lie, and he kept amplifying these lies on Twitter well after the interview. Thus begins the story of Bret Weinstein, a demagogue from the start, stoking the fires of anti-woke conservative hatred for personal gain with no remorse whatsoever. Now on to the actual science denial, since that's the real focus here. During and shortly following his departure from academia, Bret gained notoriety through a series of appearances on, where the hell else, Joe Rogan's podcast. Having his web presence sufficiently amplified by these appearances enabled him to monetize something of his own, so Bret began dishing out consistently garbage conspiratorial takes about everything under the sun on his own Dark Horse podcast that he hosts with his wife Heather Haying, who also taught biology at Evergreen. Much of their rhetoric capitalizes on a perceived intellectualization of baseless anti-establishment talking points, which we will highlight where relevant. So what are the main topics he needs to be exposed for? Here's what's on the menu for the Bret half of the video.
Why I'm showing this to you is because this is on YouTube. It's on a very big channel called Professor Dave Explains, and he's not a great guy. You know, like he's very left, and a lot of things are going to be quite awful, and his whole take on the pandemic is awful. But he does debunk a lot of things, and he's a clever guy, and he makes a really sharp video. And nothing he says here, as far as I can tell, is that far off. Which, again, understand what that sets us up for if Bret is on our team. Understand what that sets us up for if Sasha Latipova is on our team. That means Soph is on our team. If Alex Jones is on our team, that's what we're being set up for. And on the other side, this is how easy it is. Yes, it's delicious, but it's a giant vulnerability in our Health and Human Services Secretary, in our NIH Director nominee, and in all of our populist right movement, which somehow or another is being led by people like Bret and McKernan and McCullough and Bannon.
First up, Bret's attempt at revolutionizing all of medical science. According to Bret, and also his brother Eric, Bret had an astounding insight about telomeres that was stolen from him to win a Nobel Prize. To get some context, let's first briefly discuss what telomeres are. Telomeres are sections of DNA that cap every chromosome in almost all animal species. The evolutionary impetus for this is that every time DNA gets replicated prior to cell division, because of the way that replicative enzymes anneal to the template strand, the last few bases can't be read. So the new complementary strand is necessarily a few dozen nucleotides shorter than the template strand. This poses an obvious problem because as incredibly long as chromosomes are, with many millions of base pairs, thousands of cycles of replication and cell division would eventually result in important genetic information being lost.
Now, this is a problem for a number of reasons that I don't want to go into, and I don't want to debunk Professor Dave too much, but he's really revealing how little he knows versus what he has read and memorized. So all of the cells in your body, the vast majority of them are like, 20 cell divisions from the egg or something like that. It ain't that far. So we're not talking about thousands of replication events here in the grand scheme of development and maintenance of us as a pattern integrity. And even in the places where we are talking about constant cell division, it's not quite what he's talking about. Yes, this makes sense from a cartoon perspective. Yes, it makes sense from a cartoon perspective. But the vast majority of DNA translation is partial. It's not copying all of it. And so if telomeres have some function when it is all copied, I guess that's possible. But the rationale is simply one of cartoon drawings. Well, if we draw and we open up the double helix and we start to replicate, I just don't see how that works. There's some problem there. And so we've done a lot of indirect testing that we say gives us some insight into the fact that this might be an issue, but I still don't see this as being an exhaustive explanation for what telomeres are. And so although he's dunking on Bret, it would feel like he's kind of dunking on him in a kind of disingenuous way. Neither of them know what telomeres really do.
and therefore new cells that can't survive. Evolution stumbled upon a solution in the form of telomeres, which are around 5 to 15...
I mean, evolution stumbled upon a solution, which was to put a bunch of noise at the end, and that's just how he's going to explain it, and he's certain of it. That's what I find a big failure here.
15,000 base pairs long. The purpose of them is simply to act as long stretches of repetitive non-coding DNA at the ends of...
The purpose of them is to act as long strands of non-coding DNA to allow repeated replication. I guess so, whatever.
Each chromosome, so that nothing bad happens as the tips are continually eroded during replication, and an enzyme called telomerase, when expressed, is constantly at work adding more nucleotides to the ends of each strand to keep the telomeres intact as long as possible. If the telomeres are lost completely, further replication can begin to erode actual coding DNA. All kinds of problems occur, and this is called senescence.
And that is nothing to do with it. It's a correlation at best, and it's not even a good correlation. So again, here he is giving you a dumb, simple explanation with a high degree of certainty that's simply not, it's not warranted. Although he is dunking on Brett, I still don't think he's doing it very well.
Okay, so that's what telomeres are. What's Brett's big groundbreaking discovery?
We actually have a kind of concern about pharmaceuticals very generally, and this arises from the fact that in my graduate work, as many of you who are longtime fans of the podcast will know, my graduate work, I happened onto what I believe is a flaw in the drug safety system.
Now, what I want you to hear very carefully, listening right now to me, what I say, yesterday on Brett Weinstein's podcast, he again revisited this little discovery, and then specifically, for some shitty reason that I can't understand other than he must watch our shows, he decided to specifically cite Vioxx as an example of a drug that passed safety testing but shouldn't have. And the reason why it passed safety testing was because of the flaw in the safety testing system that he identified in grad school. Why on earth, of all the things he could have said statins, he said Vioxx yesterday? We are shaking them, ladies and gentlemen. We are shaking them because we are at the brick wall. The illusion is about to collapse. And they're making admissions on a daily basis.
I published this flaw, and the flaw basically amounts to the mice that are often used for things like drug safety testing and other experiments having been accidentally evolutionarily modified by the breeding protocol that is used to produce them, so that their telomeres, which are these repetitive sequences at the ends of chromosomes, have been elongated tremendously, and this has potentially very large impacts. Effectively, these animals have a capacity to repair their tissues so that if you poison them, but you don't outright kill them, they actually have an extremely good capacity to fix themselves, whereas we have a limited capacity. So they're bad models.
Yep. Brett says that because lab mice have longer telomeres than wild mice, all the drug testing on them is invalid, and all the drugs in the world are potentially dangerous. There is so much stupidity to unpack here. First, and the most glaringly obvious problem with this logic, is that all drugs go through clinical trials on human subjects before going to market. So it's mice first, then other non-rodent animal species, then humans, prior to going to market, always. This fact alone renders this entire idea irrelevant and idiotic. We know what drugs do to people before people can buy them. So even if lab mice were somehow more resistant to some toxicity, we would catch it in other test subjects. Second, telomere length is just barely even relevant to what Brett is talking about. He's talking about toxicity and tissue repair. All telomeres do is prolong the duration of time that cell division can occur prior to the onset of senescence.
All they do is, and that's probably very wrong, but he says it with a comical amount of certainty, and since he's dunking on Brett, I'm going to let him.
They aren't some magic shield from every kind of deleterious biological process. Telomere shortening isn't even the only cause of senescence. Telomere length also does not correlate linearly with lifespan. Mice have longer telomeres than humans do, and we live way longer than them. and lab mice don't have uniquely long telomeres in the first place. Other species have longer ones. But most importantly, as any biologist knows, tissue degradation occurs via so many different mechanisms, given that there are so many types of tissues, from neural tissue to muscular tissue and so forth. All of this having indeed...
So it's kind of contradictory to what he just said a minute ago. The telomeres do this and telomeres do that, right? It's funny.
Very little to do with telomeres. Telomere length does not have any impact on gene expression, its products, or its regulation, nor how toxic agents interact with the products of gene expression. A toxin that inhibits enzymatic function is not magically neutralized by telomeres. Telomeres are relevant to studies on aging and also certain kinds of cancers, but that's about it. This whole thing is just an erroneous observation extrapolated to something totally baseless, drenched in anti-pharma sentiment. It gets much worse, though. Brett pretends that this absolute nothing burger of a scientific claim was so astonishing that it was suppressed by the establishment and then subsequently stolen by a prominent researcher who used it to earn her Nobel Prize. Brett likes to retain a facade of humility whenever possible, so he needs his big brother to take the reins with this accusation, as well as generally painting Brett as some kind of mythical hero genius, and Eric does not disappoint.
In Brett's case, you probably know him, if you know him at all, as the heroic professor who stood up against what can only be described, and I swear I'm not making this up, as a Maoist insurrection.
Can you hear how much they turn the bass up? Like, seriously, I'm sorry. If I wanted to boost the bass, I could boost the bass and I could make it sound just like Brett Weinstein if I wanted to. I could even turn the mid up and then I could really have a great voice. Hello, welcome to the show. This is Gigaohm Biological. But I leave all my knobs set right in the middle, which is really funny.
At an American college in the Pacific Northwest, the Evergreen State College.
Yes, he swears he's not making up the dumb thing he made up. A Maoist insurrection. Maoism, of course, being a form of communism marked by armed insurgency. The students at Evergreen were total Maoists, with the way they had to hide in their dorms from actually armed neo-Nazis that Brett invited to their campus with his Tucker Carlson appearance. Good God, what a pretentious douchebag.
Part of it, what happened is that you are now distorting the history of science. You have a place in the history of science that you are not taking up, you are not advocating for. There's something that you don't like about this.
Well, that's laughable. Brett has published 2 papers. He's contributed essentially nothing to the field of biology. He was a teacher. But this is Eric's favorite story to tell, about his brother and himself, the revolutionary geniuses who got unfairly swept under the rug.
I know that it happened, and I know that it got buried. Yep. And I know that it's part of what I'm calling the distributed idea suppression complex, because, quite frankly, you were not the only person who was a part of this story.
Gee, can you guess who else Eric is referring to? These 2 are absolutely shameless. Speaking of which, here comes the shameless accusation. For context, Carol Greider is a molecular biologist who discovered telomerase as a grad student in the 80s and in general pioneered much of the early research on telomeres.
Carol, we are stunned to find that our paper was turned away without review from Nature.
Without review?
Without review. We need your help. Can I send you the paper and have you look at it? And she says yes. And I send her the paper. And she sends back the paper with an unbelievable number of intense criticisms that are not sensible.
Not sensible, which is code for Carol explaining to Brett how his paper sucks and him not wanting to accept reality. You can see for yourself on his paper, published in 2002, where he asserts that telomere shortening is responsible for all tissue degradation, ignoring that there are hundreds of tissue types, each with their own aging dynamic. This is why when Experimental Gerontology sent the paper to Carol to review, she panned it again.
She was in line for a Nobel Prize. That was well understood. I didn't want to accuse a leading light of the field of...
Okay, this is exactly why I got angry at you at the beginning of the podcast, you moron. No offense. You were in line for a Nobel Prize.
Yeah!
Does Eric think they give away Nobel Prizes like class participation trophies? The guy is beyond delusional. Carol discovered telomerase and is the primary pioneer of telomere research in general. Brett is a nobody who did nothing. Oh, what if this thing in mice is not something you get a Nobel for, and it has nothing to do with what Carol got hers for? Insanity.
I contact her, and I discover, through talking to her, that she and Mike are about to publish their paper on the long telomeres of laboratory mice.
So this is the delta between wild type and laboratory mice.
Yeah. And I'm shocked because she's told me they're keeping it in-house. I'm disturbed. This was my hypothesis that you were testing. I should probably be an author on this paper, but at the very least, I need to be an acknowledgement in this paper so that I can go back and point to it and say
It changes everything, that it was a prediction. It wasn't just something that was stumbled upon.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, Brett is accusing Carol of stealing his work that was published in 2002, when in fact Carol published a paper on varying telomere length in mice in 2000 and even alluded to it in another paper in 1995. Whoops.
Awarded the Nobel Prize. Carol Greider, Elizabeth Blackburn, and Shostak. What Carol Greider does with her Nobel lecture, right? Nobel lecture being the biggest lecture a scientist will ever give, the lecture that...
And filmed,
is she delivers a paper in which she very oddly has now embraced my entire set of hypotheses about the effect. She has come over from the comparison between the paper of mine that she panned and said didn't make any sense. She is now a total convert to the idea that senescence across the body is being caused by Hayflick limits that are telomere based.
Okay, and
Brett outs himself here. He backpedals from tissue degradation and all kinds of other unfounded claims to connections between telomeres and senescence, which nobody disputes and were already well known. This is what frauds do. They make bold, sweeping claims using specific keywords, and then they rein in these claims to reference established science with the same keywords in order to pretend that it vindicates them. The electric universe grifters use this playbook when they make up bullshit about electricity powering the galaxy and then point at Birkeland currents as though they substantiate any of the bullshit they spew. As anyone can plainly see, this narrative attracts the people that it attracts because of the anti-establishment sentiment. These podcast episodes are littered with comments from people praising Brett for his unparalleled brilliance, just because he says a bunch of words they don't understand. It's ridiculous. Do they look for interviews with actual
He can't see the fact that those comments are part of the illusion, right? And so maybe he doesn't know. My guess is that he probably doesn't know. Even though he's used in the same way.
Accomplished scientists and dish out the same type of praise? Were they dropping praise on Carol Greider when she got the Nobel? Of course not. They have no interest in following scientific research, and they have no idea what Brett is...
Mark, I don't know who Hayflick worked for. I can't remember anymore. Did he work for Howard Tenem? Tenon, is that who it was? I don't know.
...saying when he references scientific concepts. The allure is not any kind of alleged scientific achievement. It's the story of the underdog, the one who got screwed over by the system. And
he worked for Kaprowski at Witstar? Oh my goodness, that's fantastic. Sorry, I didn't remember that.
The corrupt bureaucracies behind it all. That's why people are here, and that's the only story the Weinsteins know how to tell. This tale continues for Brett, as it did for most of the science-denying charlatans who are popular today, with the onset of the COVID pandemic. There are three primary narratives he pushed relentlessly in this realm. The first was a cartoonish level of confidence in the lab leak hypothesis with absolutely zero evidence. The second was being one of the main players in pushing ivermectin as some kind of preventive measure for COVID, again with zero basis. And the third was jumping on the bandwagon of fabricating millions of deaths from COVID vaccines. Let's take these one.
Now remember, pushing the lab leak is the mystery that I think the DOD and the departments of whatever and whoever intelligence agencies around the world did. All of these 77th Brigade and all this, they were all pushing the idea that there was a mystery to solve. So that's for sure. And everybody's in on that. Promoting ivermectin was something that I think was promoted above hydroxychloroquine at some point, maybe because hydroxychloroquine does work. That was something that Zev Zelenko was using. So promoting ivermectin so vigorously as he did without even acknowledging that hydroxychloroquine was out there the year before is strange. Pierre Corey having a book about ivermectin is strange. Alexandros Marinos in that sequence, in that signal chat with Brett and I, pushing ivermectin for a year, as well as Elon Musk being a genius and a patriot, was also weird. But it's very consistent with what this guy on the left can clearly see Brett did. And then finally, remember, my argument is that they rolled out an incredible number of placebos. So the complaining about vaccine deaths can be easily misconstrued as a lie because of the way that they rolled out the transfection. So here we go.
One at a time. Since the emergence of the novel coronavirus from China in 2019, plenty of conspiracy theories have circulated as to its origin, contradicting the widely proposed zoonotic origin, meaning arising naturally in animal populations. In this case, bats, and developing virulence in humans through natural evolutionary processes, likely after passing through some intermediate species such as pangolins. The more outlandish of these ideas involved the notion that China deliberately created SARS.
Now, of course, we know that they could have made the sequence, and they could have made as large a quantity as they wanted to, because that's just synthetic genetic technology. That's just recombinant genetics. Any pharmaceutical company that produces a biologic would have the necessary infrastructure to grow a great big culture of bacteria and then make a large quantity of a DNA plasmid. And so if they wanted to find a DNA sequence somewhere and they wanted to spray it everywhere, or they wanted their agent in Wuhan to claim to have found it, they could do that. And this guy seems to be acutely unaware of what infectious clone means in the virology literature and how they are used to distribute these sequences and fraudulently support the idea of virology in a laboratory, which is really just the transfection of animals in cell culture, which this guy should be sophisticated enough to understand, but apparently doesn't.
Coronavirus 2 as a bioweapon and released it on the world intentionally, something that has been quite thoroughly refuted via genomic analysis, which would require a whole video unto itself to explain.
So this guy believes that all the genomic analysis that Kevin McKernan says is real, and it's got 18 million sequences, is real. He believes in all that.
Far less conspiratorial was the notion that the virus accidentally leaked from a lab in Wuhan. As early as June 2020.
Far less conspiratorial is that the virus was in a lab and that it was leaked. And this is also a very Fauci-esque kind of stance to take, that means it was still a natural virus if it was found in a bat cave and it just leaked out of a laboratory that happened to have it. Wow, this is...
Brett was on the record saying he was 90% sure this was the case.
And that theory was demonized at first, that, it can't, come on, that's conspiracy thinking, that it would started in the lab. But it certainly is a 50-50, would you say that?
It's far more likely than that. As a matter of
This is 2020, ladies and gentlemen. This is not by accident. No one is in front of us by accident, and definitely not in 2020.
In fact, I said, I think in June, that the chances that it came from the lab look.
What apparently Professor Dave doesn't understand is that you don't get on Bill Maher by chance, that you don't get promoted by chance, that you don't get in front of the Senate to complain about something that happened at a podunk university by chance.
To me, to be about 90%.
This is already ridiculous. 90% sure based on what? A hunch? His spidey sense? He offers absolutely nothing to substantiate this, but it gets so much worse. As time passed, he began to reject any data regarding zoonotic origin as a conspiracy from the virology community. When any such papers were released, he would pretend they were government lies sent to squash the lab-leaked truth while people were distracted by the war in Ukraine. In conversation with Joe Rogan, he has said even crazier things, like that pandemics emerging from nature are nothing to worry about. Fatality during the Spanish flu of a century ago was due to overprescription of aspirin. He thinks polio is actually due to pesticides, and implies that most viruses are lab leaks, claiming that monkeypox shows signs of gain-of-function research.
And now you see it. He is exactly trapped in the Scooby-Doo. It's just the inversion of where we were trapped. And that inverted trap is just as sticky as the one that we were in. It's just as compelling as the one that we are in. And now you can see that this limited spectrum of debate is visible from different angles. If you get on the other side of Brett, that's what you see. You see what this guy sees. If you get on our side of Brett, you see what we see. And either way, Brett shouldn't be where he is, except for it is designed that way. Because it's one Lollapalooza of liars. We're just watching from different stages, from different angles.
He is just completely off his rocker.
There was a enthusiasm for prescribing aspirin for people who came in with flu symptoms, and they were prescribed aspirin in doses that are now known to be deadly. Is something like an epidemic of polio that's not really an epidemic of polio. You have an epidemic of gypsy moths that are being sprayed for with these toxic pesticides. Right, it's a crazy,
Rogan
crazy
gets
story.
it now.
Next up, the ivermectin debacle. This incident is particularly fascinating to me. Once COVID vaccines began rolling out, anti-vaxxers were desperately looking for ways to criticize the operation and bypass the vaccines.
How's that for a line? Desperately looking for ways to buy.
Some suggested that ivermectin, an anti-parasitic drug, was miraculous in not just killing SARS coronavirus 2, but also in preventing infection. There is no clinical basis for this assertion, but the most hilarious aspect of this story is that it was adopted by those eager to denigrate the pharmaceutical industry for rolling out what they baselessly decided were ineffective or even harmful vaccines.
Baselessly, I told you exactly why, because they were already a known technology called transfection, and this jackass ought to know it. So again, Professor Dave is not a good guy. But what I want you to see is that this limited spectrum of debate that we are trapped in is not defined by Brett and by Dr. Drew and by Russell Brand, but it is what is created by their collective existence and coordinated lying that is the trap. You can't see the trap by just paying attention to one individual. You have to see how they are represented by the machine as a whole. And when you see how Brett is represented by the other side, it starts to become apparent how trapped we are, how impressively set up we are for a tremendous collapse, where people on the left get undermined, where people on the right get undermined by their collective misunderstanding of how we got here, by their collective misunderstanding of American history and of world history. And now everybody in America turns on themselves because they are so incongruently aligned to different charlatans that they think are patriots. We are in a desperate situation right
meant
now.
Only to make money, when ivermectin is itself a pharmaceutical drug developed initially by Merck, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. So there was
And actually run by Vincent Racaniello's wife for 20 years.
was not even any consistency to the narrative. Those pushing ivermectin wanted to stick it to the pharmaceutical industry by boycotting their vaccines and throwing their money at a random pharmaceutical drug. When medical professionals caught wind of the situation and tried to communicate to the public how there is no basis for presuming that ivermectin has any utility whatsoever in curing COVID or preventing its transmission, including Merck themselves, who issued this very statement, they were instantly labeled pharma shills trying to shut down the...
Now, of course, this is wonderful, right? Because if you watch this and you're a vigorous defender of Brett Weinstein, then you'll say, no, that's not true. Pierre Corey was censored, and these people were censored, and these meta-studies were censored. And so you're going to try and argue with this guy, and that's exactly what the limited spectrum of debate does. It convinces you that your team is right, and that other team over there is so freaking wrong that I've got to spend all my time arguing with them. And that's what this video is. It's like an invitation, and it's a trap.
The story to maintain pharma profits by people who don't even exercise their own logic to its obvious conclusion. Anyone could make the same argument for those trying to push ivermectin, a drug that would earn pharma lots of money if the whole world started taking it.
Except it's not under patent anymore, and it could be made generically. See, it's this again is as ham-fisted as the vaccine choice people. This guy is going to be ham-fisted in a lot of ways too. because the goal is to make it easy for both sides to get what they want out of the same content.
A breathtaking example of the hypocrisy of science deniers. Never one to miss out on some good old science-based charlatanry, Joe Rogan held an emergency podcast with Brett to get the word out on ivermectin, and he continued to push it relentlessly on his own with the help of various other fraudulent guests. Brett and his wife, who, if you recall, are highly skeptical about pharmaceutical drugs because of the mouse telomere thing, took ivermectin on the air on their own podcast.
And we are a bit skeptical of pills.
A lot skeptical.
A lot skeptical of pills.
Once again, there is no evidence of any kind to suggest that this drug has any utility in curing or preventing COVID. There is also no
It's funny he doesn't touch cancer, because that's where we are on our side. We're supposed to believe that all these doctors have evidence that ivermectin in combination with lots of things can cure cancer.
Basis to suggest that the vaccines are more dangerous than the virus, the excuse for why ivermectin was being promoted as an alternative. Brett will use garbage fake studies like this Carvalho paper riddled with typos, which claimed 100% efficacy, and when he gets called out for it, instead of admitting it's garbage, he just says it's a little sloppy. There was another large study which had to be retracted due to plagiarism and problems with the raw data. The same can be said for any other such papers, which again would require a video unto itself to elucidate, but I'll link to some resources in the description. He also still promotes a website called ivmmeta.com, which pretends to have a meta-analysis of ivermectin studies that shows it is overwhelmingly effective. In reality, it did things like multiplying together the p-values of every study, including fraudulent studies, cherry-picking endpoints, and so forth. And of course, a meta-analysis of garbage papers will provide garbage insight. It's as simple as that. Bad studies do not suddenly become sound when placed next to a bunch of other bad studies. The plural of garbage is not evidence. In general, Brett's narrative had long been, why aren't they running trials on this? And once large clinical trials were being done on ivermectin, proving that it isn't effective, he just came up with conspiratorial reasons to dismiss every single one of them. But dodging and lying about clinical data aside, the things Brett says to justify his position from the standpoint of biology are just laughably stupid. On his podcast, he says this.
The fact that the drug in question, ivermectin, comes from soil bacteria, it's not a completely synthetic molecule, means that it is likely to be similar to things that one's ancestors have encountered before, and there's therefore a good chance that the body has a reasonably elegant way of dealing with it rather than using some mechanism that's not so great.
Brett is clearly just taking advantage of negative connotations among the public surrounding the word synthetic. Whether a drug is synthetic or naturally occurring is totally meaningless. With
the exception of the fact that something synthetic will have a certain set of purity and contaminants that the natural one would have different aspects of.
Bacteria produce toxins that can kill thousands of humans per milligram. Anthrax, the Clostridium tetani toxin, which causes tetanus, or the Clostridium botulinum toxin, which is the single most toxic compound known to mankind. Only the science illiterate sector of the public thinks that natural equals good and synthetic equals bad. Any scientist knows better, but Brett isn't a scientist, and he's deliberately manipulating the public, so this is what he goes with. That a molecule never existed until humans made it does not tell us anything about toxicity, and naturally occurring compounds can be made synthetically, and they are indistinguishable. In the end, this is all just clickbait for anti-vaxxers, which exacerbates vaccine hesitancy, which in turn gets people killed. Lots of people who listened to Brett avoided getting vaccinated and died of COVID.
Dang, that is a bold statement, and that hurts. And that's how he's going to go on. He's also going to go on with the AIDS denialism, and I don't necessarily need to do that part. I just need you to see that Brett's track record reveals to everybody that cares that he is a fraud. On the left and the right, they can all see it. So the idea that the current Health and Human Services Secretary stood in front of and stands to promote this guy, to promote Kevin McKernan, to promote Robert Malone, this is all one steady pattern of meddlers that I call traitors that have enabled the national security exercise that was the pandemic to be successful. That's why all of their track records don't check out. That's why they look like nothing but traitors That's why these groups are they're all promoting these people, and only we see them. The vast majority of people in America do not see these meddlers and traitors. They are controlling us and not them. Instead, they are used as examples of the charlatanism and used to discredit these people. You see, this is a dangerous place for us to be when we think that we just won and Donald Trump is in and Robert F. Kennedy's in and soon Jay Bhattacharya is going to be in, and these people will have all the ammunition they need to completely destroy the reputation of the entire administration. The vaccine schedule is a criminal enterprise, ladies and gentlemen, and somehow or another, these people are not effectively fighting, and they're not effectively sending this message. That's why Gigaohm Biological ain't going to stop. The lie that they are hiding is this population pyramid. It is a biological phenomenon that's been on its way since I graduated from high school in 1990. They've known that this was coming, and they've been planning to use it as an eclipse to bamboozle the entire population of the world into thinking something happened that did not happen. And it is no less than that malevolent, because the population pyramids of all Western nations are inverted. They know that it's going to collapse. And they know that right now there's going to be an increase in all-cause mortality. They've known for a while, and they've been watching the development of social media in order to control that narrative. That's what all of this is about. We have surrendered our consciousness. It is their prime real estate, and they are occupying it with their mythologies. They are occupying it with their charlatans, with their fake organizations, with their sabotaged organizations, and it is these people who did it to us. At least they did it to me. There's no epidemiological evidence of spread, ladies and gentlemen. There is only an anticipated rise in expected deaths that was sculpted using murder to get some peaks that they could point to and call it evidence of an RNA pandemic. The list of the ways that people were murdered is available, and the reason why we didn't successfully save any of those people and we still haven't gotten justice for them is because these people are still enacting the dinner theater of the mystery-solving exercise. Brandy Vaughn is a good clue, and may she rest in peace. None of these people will ever mention her. None of these people will ever mention the ideas that she mentioned and now I mention, which is intramuscular injection is dumb. That's why all these people ignored me, and I think that's why they ignored Brandy. Ladies and gentlemen, we can say it quite succinctly, and so I suggest you take this language and run. You don't have to mention my name. Just tell people and learn and try to figure it out. Try to prove it wrong, and in the end you will learn. There is no safe vaccine, and intramuscular injection of medicine is a lie. That's what I know. That's what I've come to understand as the truth. Ladies and gentlemen, this is about all the marbles. This is for all the marbles, and so that's how I'm playing the game. If you want to know what happened, you got to fill out a calendar. I'm going to make one for you. So far, every calendar I've made is pretty ugly because it seems like none of these people were ever playing for our grandchildren. None of them. They were always enacting the Mystery Science Theater 2020, and they are guilty as guilty can be. All the marbles, ladies and gentlemen, pretty easy to summarize injection versus ingestion. I mean, that's easy. It's pretty easy to summarize. PCR is a fraud as a diagnostic. The only thing they can do is make a lot of DNA. Because they can make a lot of DNA, that means that they could give it to their agent, or their agent could deploy it and find it, and that could be done easily with a synthetic recombinant pure quantity that they can make and call an infectious clone or anything else. The only bottom line is that transfection was a crime, and the way they got away with it was releasing placebo. That's why Professor Dave is so confident that nobody died of the vaccine. The real illusion here is endemicity, and I'm sure Professor Dave would explain exactly what it is and exactly how it occurs, and there would be no biological basis for it in his explanation other than he's damn certain that somebody told him it's true. One slide, ladies and gentlemen, non-specific PCR tests on a hot background, RNA cannot pandemic, intramuscular injection is dumb, transfecting healthy people was always crime, and population pyramid is a real problem. Thank you very much for being here. This is Team Worst Case Scenario. I'm certain of it. Don't let the past be erased. Don't let our kids inherit this myth. Make sure that they inherit the truth from you so that they can pass that on to their grandkids. Thanks for being here, guys. I'll see you again tomorrow.
It's a lab leak. I believe it's a lab leak. I have no responsibility. It's a lab leak. It is much more likely it's a lab leak.